I need to begin by simply saying what a joy it is for me to be with you this morning. And that's really all I need to say, right? It's just a joy to be with you this morning. Welcome. And for those of you who are visitors today, a very, very special welcome for you as well. So here we are in this beautiful reality of what it means for us to be part of a liturgical tradition where we have this incredible canon that we have in the Bible, readings that come across a huge expanse of that story between communities that see themselves in relationship with God and their understanding of what that relationship looks like for them at different moments in time across what is literally a human history of thousands of years. And in the midst of that, one of the what I think a real genius in the Judeo-Christian, well, really the Judeo tradition, that Old Testament sense of telling story, is of continually holding a canon of sacred scripture that looks at the history of the nation in light of how the nation is or is not aligning itself with their best understanding of what would be the will of God. And just like as individuals, we don't always live up to that high calling, there are often times in the life of the people, in the leadership of the people, where that sense of how are we to live if we live congruently with God is lost. And when those moments happen, the tradition lifts up prophetic voices that are part of the community but sit on the very side, and those voices come forward and remind the nation of where they are falling short. Over and over again, especially for those in power, the leadership of the time, comes that prophetic voice that says, if a community, if a people, if a nation is going to live up to this whole high calling of being congruent with the will of God, what does it look like? And first and foremost, it is a just society. Not necessarily that everybody has the same, but certainly a society where the very wealthy do not take advantage of the very poor, and that the needs of the most vulnerable inside of society don't get trampled on for the sake of the rich or the powerful or the ones entrenched with things. There is that tenderness for the needy, for the sick, for the women, for the outcast, for the children, and for the stranger. And when the leadership forgets that, the prophetic voice lifts it up time and time again. That was true and relevant several thousand years ago, and it has been true and relevant throughout the arc of human history. So here we come to who we are, a community today, in this place, in this country, in this time, and with all the things that are happening now. And I ask you, if we want to live up to that high calling of living congruently with our best understanding of the will of God, is it easy or hard? Hard? Is it always clear what we should be doing? I'm really happy to see some, it's so, it sounds so simple to say, oh, we should live as God's people. But I just think for myself, I'll use I statements this morning of all the many, many, many different things that come to me day in and out. Community stuff in the media, different religious authorities, all of them clamoring for my heart, for my attention, for my commitment, and wrapping themselves in a divine mandate. And just to keep me really confused enough, sometimes they're totally the opposite, the one of the other. Have you had that experience too? Yeah? And then in the middle of that, the very important question, if I've made that step in my life that I really want to align myself with the will of God, and I belong to a community that wants to align itself with the will of God, the big, big question over and over again, how do we know? How do we know? How do we take all of the, we could say, oh, we could look to the Bible. Well, I've been like living in Bible land for a long time, and when we do that, go to the Bible too simply, I would say, and you can tell me whether you agree or not, that we can take any position out there and go to the Bible and find an argument for it. And then we could take the completely opposite position, go to the Bible, and find an argument for it. So how do we know? Have you had that experience of like really, really different positions, and a biblical, a Bible-based argument is made, and we look to the Bible as our authority, as we should, but they're the opposite one from the other? How do we know? I mean, in really, really good conscience? Easy or hard to know, and how to stay ourselves lined up with our hope for the will of God. And in my own life, over the course of my life, with all of the things that happen in the course of a human life, think of all of the different moments and experiences and opportunities and challenges in your life. And if we gather as a people who have made a hope or a commitment, as we do in our baptismal covenant, to live congruently with the will of God, the same question. How do we know? Is it easy or hard? Individuals, vestries, dioceses, larger communities, peoples and nations, over and over again. How do we know? Well, one way of knowing is that we appeal to an authority. And there are people who answer the how do we know question by not wanting to struggle with it too much and belonging to communities that have a real strong sense of authority. I know because I do what the leadership in the community tells me to do, and I follow that. And for some people that is very comforting, and for some people it's the best way to go. But here we are as Episcopalians in the state of Oregon, and I would ask you, does being told what to do and how to believe work for us? Does it? Are we the kind of people who just does something because someone stood at the front like I'm doing today and says, this is the way it is, now do it? So no, not at all. In fact, I would say that one of the things that we really, really value about our identity as Christians in the Episcopal tradition, you can tell me whether this statement is true for you or not, that we value being able to ask a lot of questions. And that we want the freedom to kind of think about something, and it's not that we don't want to come to a place of deep faith and deep commitment and deep rightness. We are looking for that, but we want to come to that place in a way that's congruent with our questions and our story, and we want to do the right thing out of a sense of freedom and out of a sense of personal exploration and experience and commitment. Does that resonate with some of you? Now, sometimes things get a little messy when we do that, because what do we do when we have different experiences and different thoughts? And maybe sometimes that is Episcopal communities at their absolutely best, and sometimes that can be Episcopal communities at their absolutely not the very best. But here we are anyway, gathered together in the name of Jesus. But there's that question always, and it's hard, but it's really important. How do we know? There's that vision held up for us. How do we know? So we take that from our Old Testament Hebrew Bible readings and from our psalm today, and we can put that in conversation with a story that is almost hard to re-enter, which is because it is so very familiar, which is the story of Mary and Martha and Jesus. And I must say, I love these Jesus stories. And one of the things that I really love about them is that they are so domestic. I can find myself in this house. Sometimes I relate with Mary, sometimes I relate with Martha, and I really relate to the moment. And I have this special tenderness for knowing that when I am asking that how do I know question, as a Christian, I look to the stories and the teaching of Jesus as we have them in the Gospels. And if I sit with those stories, and especially when I sit with those stories in community, that is one of the very best places that I know to ask that how do I know question. So here we are with Mary and Martha today, a very familiar story. Now, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a rabbit trail because I'm sure for most of you this is a really familiar story. So you've heard lots and lots of sermons over the years about Mary and Martha's stories. And haven't you found yourself some year wanting to be a little playful with a story and wanting to kind of turn it out on its head and really wanting to empathize with Martha? You know, the story Jesus has the story has Jesus telling Mary that she has chosen the better part. But don't you want to look at it the other way and say, hey, wait a minute. Martha's the one out there cooking dinner. At the end of the day, everyone is hungry. So why, and I've been in that spot where either I was hungry and I really appreciated the person that cooked a meal, or I'm the one cooking the meal. And by golly, I want people to appreciate me, especially if they're not helping. So again, I ask you, can some of you relate to that piece of the story as well? And I think most of us can. But what I would like to do with the story today is use the Mary and Martha story a little bit outside of that intimate, relational, domestic sphere, and use it as yet another way to answer that question, how do we know? We have Martha busy being active and doing things. We have Mary who is sitting, who is watching, who is listening, who is thinking, and who is reflecting. And that is the contrast that the story is putting before us. Now, it is, I think, very true that our experience of the world today is that we live in a very noisy world, a very fast world where things are set on the surface and that the pace at which things come to us is very relentless, whether we want it to be that way or not. And in the face of that relentless world in which we live, Christianity, along with most, if not all, of the major spiritual and religious traditions across human history, lifts up something very different. When human beings come to their understanding of the sacred with that burning question, how do I know? The tradition says, if you would come closer to the mind and to the heart and to the will of the divine, start by being quiet. Start by being still. And in that stillness and in that silence, you will find something that you wouldn't have found in the noise or in the movement. Start by being still. Start by being quiet. And listen and wait wait for what you find in the stillness and in the silence. Now that can be a very different message and a very different practice from what contemporary life tends to do. But the world is filled with traditions that lift this up. Sometimes it's called meditation, sometimes it is called mysticism, sometimes, and very much in the Christian tradition, it's called contemplation. How many of you are familiar with the work of Richard Rohr or with the Center for Action and Contemplation, holding those two pieces of human experience, the waiting, stillness, and listening, and the intentional action? And if we look at the Mary Martha story, it could be a way of reminding us that as we go about our lives as individuals and as communities, as you go about your life today, looking for lining up your life with our best shot at what is the heart of God for us, that one way to do that is to be robust and generous about building quietness and silence into our spiritual practice. And when we are wrestling with those "how do I know" questions, rather than let the words of the surface or the noise around us move us, that we step back and we step down and we step deep. And in that silent space, amazing things can and will happen. Think over the course of your lives of times and places when you have been active, and of times and places when you have been still. Can you think of times when they connected in that still place that didn't seem to be doing anything, yet was very influential on what happened later? And you go back and you say, how was it this thing that guided my life so well at this moment had its root in this moment of silence? And thus, the more we keep that good balance between the movement and the action, the better our movement will be. And maybe as we do that individually and as a community, the better we will answer the question with which we began: how do I know? Action and contemplation, words and silence, movement and quiet. Two sides of our human life that allow us to ground ourselves in an authentic experience of God and move forward with humility, but with a better shot, perhaps, at walking and aligning ourselves congruently with the will of God. So as you go through your week today, my invitation to you will be spend time thinking about that. For some of you, there might be a nudge towards movement. For some of you, there might be a little nudge towards being a little quieter. There's no right or wrong way of doing this. There's no right moment to do this, because all of the different moments of our lives are unique, and no one has been exactly where you stand yourself today. But take these beautiful summer days and think about that balance in your own life and see whether anything either blesses where you are or perhaps nudges you just a little bit one way or the other. So as we finish our time of reflection on the Word today, I want to finish with a quote that is also a blessing. It comes from Canticle of Praise by Beverly Lancetta, and it goes like this: prayer is sitting in the silence until it silences us. choosing gratitude until we are grateful, and praising God until we ourselves are an act of praise. Amen.